Okay, so in addition to this being my normal rotation of Parsha and Kugel, this is also this Shabbos the YU Torah Mitzion Beit Midrash is having a Shabbaton at the Bayit, and our theme is Can a Halachic State Thrive? We've dedicated our Shabbatons this year to celebrating 70, as it's the 70th year of the State of Israel. So I want to derive some lessons about Israeli politics, shall we say, in the broadly speaking, from the Parsha. So I want to focus on a very short incident in the Parsha. So if you look at number 1, we know that Yaakov, after working for Lavan, so the first 14 years, he worked for him for his 2 daughters. First, the one he wanted to marry, and then, well, actually no, first the one he didn't want to marry, thinking it was the one he wanted to marry, and then vice versa, but okay, fine. But then he worked another 6 years, and for that he got a salary. And the deal he'd made with Lavan was that any of the different, not normal animals, at different points, streaked and spotted and speckled and all that, would be his salary. So they start off, Lavan takes away the animals that have those qualities that would be genetically predisposed to pass it on to their children, thereby giving them the money to Yaakov. But Yaakov then does something which seems a bit questionable, little bit shady. Right, Vayasar bayomahu et Yeshiman akudim v'atluim et kol izim anikudot kol asher Lavan bo v'kol chum b'ksavim v'yitain b'yad banav. So Lavan took all these animals that were spotted and speckled and he gave it to his sons. V'yazim derech shloshet amim beino v'in Yaakov. Yaakov roed son Lavan and Tarot. And he put a 3-day distance between those animals, and Yaakov had the rest. V'yikach lo Yaakov makal livneh lach v'luz v'armon. So he took these fresh shoots of poplar and almond and plane, and he peeled white strips in them. And he put them, striped in front of the animals. And he put them in the troughs of water when the goats would come to drink during the mating season. And this, however exactly it worked, it caused consistently the sheep and goats of Lavan to be born in a statistically disproportionate way, not white or not single colored, and therefore to be passed on to Yaakov as his salary. Now in this unit, it sounds a bit, right, I wouldn't say dishonest, but it's a bit questionable, right? It's clearly that the deal was, the assumption, right, even if it's not lying, the assumption was that the salary would be a small percentage of the animals, and Yaakov, however exactly the science works out, arranges the situation that he's going to make a lot more money than was preconceived. However, you find out in number 2 that it may not have been Yaakov's own doing. Because in a parak later, you find out when Lavan, after Yaakov flees and Lavan chases him, so you find out, right now he says, a little bit before that, Yaakov says to his wives as he's about to flee, the problem was with Lavan, he switched my salary 10 times, but God didn't allow him to mess with me. If Lavan said, you'll get the striped ones, they were born striped. If spotted. And God took your father's money and gave it to me. Now this seems a bit, right, at first glance, disingenuous, because Yaakov went out of his way to arrange this situation. So now when he's telling Lavan's daughters that it was God who did it, that's not the story that we heard in Perek Lamed. So the Mefarshim struggle with this. Now some of the Mefarshim say, no, he did all of this following a prophetic dream, that Hashem told him to do this. That's it. We just didn't hear about it earlier. Alternatively, What he's saying is, no, it was his own initiative, but who said that this quasi-scientific plan was going to work? He's just stating the facts, that afterwards, the fact that it worked indicated that God liked it. Alternatively, he's putting a spin on it for some of the first. No, he's really putting a spin on it for his wives. But no, this was just sort of him being smart in business. Right? He didn't do anything illegal. He didn't do anything technically dishonest. He didn't say that he wasn't going to try to encourage the animals to give birth to animals that he would get as his salary. But that was a question that the Mefarshim struggled with. And that notion that maybe Yaakov, there was something a bit less than kosher here, or a bit questionable, stayed with the Jews for a very long time. To the point where, if you look at number 3, whether what Yaakov did was unethical or smart business, or was simply an act of God, is a machlokas between Shylock and Antonio in The Merchant of Venice. So, you know The Merchant of Venice, right? By Shakespeare, Shylock is the evil Jew, right? He demands a pound of flesh as his repayment for the loan. So there's a conversation between Shylock and Antonio about whether Shylock follows a proper set of business practices. So Shylock said, I had forgot. 3 months you told me so. Well, then your bond and let me see but hear you. Methought you said, you neither lend nor borrow upon advantage. Antonio said, I never do use it. So Shylock said, this is what's important. Shylock said, you know where I got these ideas of being clever in business, a bit cutthroat? When Jacob grazed his uncle Laban's sheep, this Jacob from our holy Abram was, as his wise mother wrought in his behalf, the third possessor, he was the third. Right, remember Jacob, the third of the patriarchs? Antonio says, and what of him? Did he take interest? Right? What, he took interest? That's why you think you can collect a pound of flesh on your interest? So Shylock says, no, he did not take interest, not as you would say, directly interest. Mark what Jacob did. When Laban and himself were to compromise, and all the weanlings which were streaked and pied should fall as Jacob's hired, the ewes being rank. And the end of autumn turned to the rams, and when the work of generations was between these woolly breeders in the act, the skillful shepherd peeled me certain wands, and in the doing of the deed of kind, he stuck them up before the fulsome ewes, who then conceiving did in eaning time full partly colored lambs, and those were Jacob's. This was a way to thrive, and he was blessed, and thrift is blessing, if men steal it not. And Shylock says, look, as long as I don't steal, I can be as clever as I want. I can be as ruthless as I want in business. In fact, this is my birthright. Like, this is what it means. This is from Jacob. Antonio responds, this was a venture, sir, that Jacob served for, a thing not in his power to bring to pass, but swayed and fashioned by the hand of heaven. Was this inserted to make interest good, or is your gold and silver ewes and rams? He said, what are you talking about? First of all, this was his salary. He'd been cheated by Lavan for 20 years, and second of all, he didn't do it. It was God who ordained this. But if God hasn't come to you in a prophetic dream, who says you can be so cutthroat? Shylock says, I cannot tell. I make it breed as fast. But note me, senor. And Antonio says, and this is a great critique, and he says, mark this, Bassanio. The devil can cite scripture for his purpose. An evil soul producing holy witness is like a villain with a smiling cheek. A goodly apple rotten at the heart, or what a goodly outside falsehood hath. He said, it's very nice. Anyone can look at the psukim. If they want to find an excuse to be cutthroat, they'll find it. But that's not what the psukim mean. But the fact is that there is that ambiguity in the story. Now look, if you look at Rabbeinu Bachya, so Rabbeinu Bachya sides with Paul and with Antonio, right? That it wasn't Yaakov, it was God. Vidah, number 4, Kimashal Akachol Yaakov, Makel Livneh Lo Asazeh Me'atzmo, Rak Al Pi HaMalach, just know it's from God. V'hinei Yaakov Kishara Mareh Azot B'Chalom Yadash HaKadosh Baruch Hu Oseh Lo Neitz, Kedei Shelo Yirmeh Oto Lavan. When he saw this in a dream, he knew that God was making a miracle, so Lavan couldn't cheat him. And that's what he said, that God was with me. He said everything was on the up and up. God had ordained this. But let me phrase the problem differently. Let's say that's true. It was totally honest. God said, here's the dream. This is what I want you to do. And he followed God. Don't we have a principle? V'yitem nikiyim Hashem Yisrael. It's not just important that what you do is right. It's important that what you do looks right. Right? It seems off. Even if God told him. Why would God ordain that this would happen to the point where in the anti-Semitic trope invoked by Shakespeare, this becomes Shylock's excuse to be cutthroat, to demand a pound of flesh, to be usurious, right? To charge interest. Why did Hashem, even if God told him, let's say he did, right? Let's follow Rabbeinu Bachya. Doesn't it leave the question open? Why? Why did he want to do something that looks so odd? So here I think is the yesod, and this is where it comes to politics. If you look at number 5, I gave you Parshat Vayetze, really Toldat Vayetze follows what's known as a chiasm. I've mentioned chiasms before, from the Greek letter, right, chi, or the X. Yaakov's life seems to follow a perfect pattern. You look at it, right, I did it so you can see the parallels. As he leaves, Yitzchak asks Yaakov for his name and blesses him, and he has to lie. Right? The only way he could get a bracha, he was the Yaakov, Ishtam Yoshev Ha'alim. He wasn't Esav. Yitzchak didn't really want to give him the bracha. He has to lie and say he's Esav. And then Esav explains, you know why you're Yaakov? Because you're deceptive. Right? And then Esav cries, and Esav threatens to kill Yaakov. And Yaakov runs away. And Yaakov goes and he encounters the Beit Elokim, he encounters the Malachim. And then he sets up the rocks and he promises 10% to God, and then he's tricked by Lavan. That's one trajectory of his life. But then Yaakov's life seems to reverse itself. Lavan tries to trick Yaakov with regard to his salary, and Yaakov instead tricks him back and gets the money. On his way out, he encounters angels again. But this time, he sends the angels to meet Esav. And Yaakov is worried that Esav will kill him, but he comes up with a strategy. And he faces Esav just like he did. Yaakov fights the angel of Esav, and he's renamed Yisrael. Right? So he leaves fleeing from Esav. He comes back. Esav wants to kill him, but this time he confronts him. He leaves and he sees angels. He comes back. He meets the angels again, but this time he controls the angels. He comes in and Lavan tricks him. He leaves as he is able to one-up Lavan. And the image that the Psukim seem to be pointing to is that Yaakov was sent to Haran, not just to save himself from Esav, and not just to get married, but because Yaakov needed to learn. Right? He needed to be the father of a nation. If you want to be the father of a nation, you've got to learn how to deal with real life. And real life is tough. You can't just run away from Esav. You can't just watch the angels. You've got to harness that power. You've got to be able to stand up to Yaakov. You've got to Esav. You've got to stand up to Lavan. And you know what? Sometimes it's a bit questionable, because if you're dealing with people like Lavan, you've got to do things that may not be actually unethical. But sometimes you've got to do things that are a bit questionable, and you've got to be comfortable with that. Because that's what politics are about. And if you're going to build a nation, then you've got to do that. Look at the Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara in Shabbos seems to say something incredible about leadership. The Gemara is talking about something totally else, something different. The Gemara says, Amar of Ami ein misa below chet v'in yisurin below avon. There is no death without sin, and there's no suffering without sin. So then, in the middle of that discussion, after the ellipsis, the Gemara says, "Va'amar lei v'halo Moshe va'Aaron shekimu kol haTorah kula umesu." How can you say you can only die if you sin? Aaron and Moshe never sinned, and they died. Stop right there. What's the problem? It's not true. And the Gemara says, "Hu de'amar ki haitana." You're right. He holds like the position that they did sin. Did Tanya Shimon Elazar Amar Af Moshe v'Aaron b'cheta mesu? Because Shimon Elazar says that Moshe and Aaron died in their sin. Shneimar Yan lo amantem bi ha'amantem bi adayin lo agiz manchem lipater min ha'olam. This goes like the shita that he actually sinned. Now, what's bizarre beyond belief about this Gemara What do you mean the shita that he sinned, the opinion he sinned? It's a pasuk he sinned. God said that Moshe and Aaron sinned. What do you mean it's only according to one opinion that he sinned? It is a pasuk. So I once heard from my karmi that the Gemara is saying something, right, under the surface here, and saying, you know what? It's true they made a mistake. But what exactly do you expect from them? They're leaders. You can't be a leader and not do things. You can't and not make mistakes and not do things which are less than perfect. You want to do that, stay in kollel your whole life. But if you want to go into leadership, even in, right, you want to be even a rabbi, right? In kollel, maybe you could be perfect, right? You can stay in your ivory tower. But if you go into the field, any field, real life doesn't look that perfect. It just doesn't. So the Gemara was willing to entertain the possibility that maybe it didn't even count that they sinned. Yeah, they made a mistake, but that was because they went into leadership roles. And then the Gemara continues and said there were 4 people who never sinned. Arba mesu be'ito shel nachash. Ve'eluhein, Binyamin ben Yaakov, Amram avi Moshe, Yishai avi David, Kilav ben David. The Gemara says, who were they? Yishai, the father of David, Kilav, the son of David, Amram, the father of Moshe, and Binyamin, the son of Yaakov. And Rabbi Karmi said, what is the Gemara telling you? It doesn't just say their names. It says who they're related to. You know why? If there ever was a person who didn't make a mistake, it's the person who lie in the shadows. But the people who were great, obviously they made mistakes. Maybe Amram didn't make a mistake, but Moshe did. Maybe Kilav and Yishai didn't make mistakes, but David did. Because if you want to be a leader, you're going to make mistakes. That's part of life. You can't live in the real world. You can't lead if you're not ready to sometimes make mistakes and sometimes do things that are questionable. And I think that lesson is very, very poignant if you're thinking about politics in Israel. Because you look at the next 3 quotes, and this will finish. Rav Kook asked the question number 7. He said, why did we go into Galus? So he said, in exile, Israel abandoned its preoccupation with secular matters that concern the people as a whole and turned its eyes and hearts towards heaven. It stopped trying to amass power, chariots, and horses like every other people on earth. And the nation as a collective ceased all materialistic pursuits. It no longer desired the debaucheries of the surrounding people. The Spirit of God began to beat within the people once again and to awaken them to the true height of the human soul. So too they became aware once more of the Jewish people's spiritual potential. Their eyes and hearts, which were habitually cast heavenwards, began to recuperate from the backslidings and sin of their national life. He said, why do we go to Golus? Because in Golus, when you don't have political power, so you can afford to be perfect. So after we'd sinned in Israel and the Beit HaMikdash had to be destroyed, so we were sent into Golus, because in Golus, when you don't have power, so you can be perfect, you can purify yourself. But what about when we're in power? So he says in 8, talking about why we had such wars against the nations of Canaan. He says, we were forced to leave the international political stage, although there was an inner desire that we do so until the glorious time when it would be possible to conduct a government without evil or barbarism. This is the era for which we long. We hope to go back to the era when politics doesn't require violence or difficult decisions. But our souls have been sickened by the terrible crimes of government during evil times. But now the time has come. Very soon the world will sweeten and we'll be able to repair ourselves. He said, in the time of Mashiach it'll be fine. But in 9, he said, but in the time of the Sheva Amim, it would have been totally impossible at a time when all the surrounding nations were truly wolves of the night, that only the Jewish people refrained from engaging in war. As long as we haven't reached the Messianic era, which will be the only time when you can be in politics and be perfect, we've got to do things that are questionable. We've got to do things that are violent. We've got to do things that are hard. He said that's what it means to be willing to engage in politics, willing to engage in the world, is willing to do things that are hard.